Hello everybody. As always, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we are going to talk about the prepared mind and the unprepared mind. And so I'm going to be dividing this lecture into two separate videos. And in the first lecture here, we are going to discuss what the prepared mind is, or what the initiated mind is, and why that's important, exactly the kind of practices that we need to do, the sort of characteristics or kind of personality that we need to develop in order to enter into certain spiritual topics. In the second lecture, which will be premiered next week, we're going to discuss the unprepared mind and what that looks like, and what happens when an individual is not prepared, not educated, not spiritually, emotionally prepared to enter into certain ultimately esoteric topics, and what that does to the individual, what it does to society. And so the real underlying thrust of these two lectures is to really highlight and really understand that there's a really big difference between a mind that is prepared to enter into esoteric topics and analyze them and understand them and interact with them, to take them on, and a mind that is not prepared, and what happens to that individual and ultimately a society that falls into a period of degradation where spiritual concepts are being discussed, and our ancient past is being discussed, and beings from other spheres, but there really isn't that deep understanding of the spiritual worlds, spiritual science or occult science or mystery science. And so what ends up happening is if the mind is unprepared, we end up making a big mess of our own history, of our own understanding of past civilizations and past epochs. We don't understand how we actually evolve. We certainly don't understand our ancient past and certain formative events. We don't understand our own myths, our own origins, right? And if we don't understand that, we're certainly not going to grasp our future and where we're headed. It's going to be meaningless to us. And so these lectures will hopefully outline the importance of preparing yourself for these topics, why that's important, and the distinct difference between an individual that's going into these topics prepared and unprepared. Okay, because it really does make a huge difference on the level of discussion and just honestly how productive ultimately the conversations are. So this is really coming forward because, in my Venus series, we are talking about essentially beings that are often labeled as being aliens or being extraterrestrials in our modern conversation. And that's actually completely incorrect. And in our modern conversations, in various television programs and streaming platforms and through very popular spiritual teachers and through, scientific discovery and archaeology and all of this stuff, what we're trying to do is we're trying to go back into our past, and in many cases, our very ancient past, and we're trying to apply our current level of consciousness. And when I say consciousness, I don't mean whether you're smart or not smart, awakened or unawakened. I mean actually a quality of consciousness, a kind of perception. So we're trying to, for example, apply a post-Atlantean level of consciousness, to use an anthroposophical term, to a Lemurian level of development or an Atlantean level of development, and the various civilizations that rose and fell within those two epochs. And it doesn't work because every single epoch has a different kind of consciousness. And again, I'm not talking about intelligence, right? Whether someone's smart or not smart. I'm talking about actually the human energy system functioned in a different way. There were certain organs of perception that were at different levels of maturation. And you actually interacted with each other, with other human beings in a different way, with nature in a different way, with the mineral kingdom in a different way. They're almost like different worlds. When you look back into the Earth's ancient past, if you're not aware that consciousness goes through major shifts, the human energy body goes through major shifts, you will go back to the Atlantean epoch and you will think that that is a different planet, right? Like if a psychic were to, read the Akashic records and their mind is unprepared, you could easily go back to Atlantis and say, this is a different civilization. This is another planet. You could go back to the Lemurian civilization and say the exact same thing. And if you go back far enough to even earlier levels of development, such as the Hyperborean levels of development, you're going to think that's absolutely another world, because the human form we have now looked nothing like it does now. So we have a real issue with this growing desire in society to dive deeper and deeper into our ancient past. I mean, look at Ancient Aliens. Look at that whole impetus for examining megaliths and these strange artifacts that appear, that began really in the 60s and 70s. That is some of the most popular material in the spiritual community, and even amongst, people who are not in the spiritual community, people who are in the ufology community, or just mainstream society. They're absolutely fascinated and taken with it. Okay, but we have to understand that if we are even going to talk about, for example, Atlantis, there actually is no entering into that conversation honestly or usefully, ultimately, unless we understand that humanity was in a different level of development with a different consciousness, and that the Earth actually functioned in a completely different way, had a different kind of energy body. We were of a different density, right? And so that's really the difference between the prepared mind and the unprepared mind in a nutshell, is that the prepared mind understands the deep nuances of spiritual development, of our ancient history, of how humanity is going to evolve in the future. There is a deep understanding of spiritual science in the individual, so they have the flexibility to dive into different topics and reach a very advanced level, because they understand the structure. And when you understand the structure, you understand the spiritual science, you can be creative. It can become personal. You can do a lot more. But if you don't understand the spiritual science, and if your mind is not prepared, what absolutely ends up happening is you end up trying to go back to, these past eras of the Earth that are extremely formative for us, that we're actually going to have to look at. We will be drawn to looking at in the coming decades. And instead of actually grasping what happened there, what will happen is too much of our current condition is going to be projected backwards into prior conditions of the Earth, and it's not really going to be understood. So basically, we're just going to project our ideas and our own consciousness backwards, and we're going to make up something completely fiction. And unfortunately, on the spiritual side of things, if you function in a lie or in delusion, that is going to spiritually connect you with the lower planes right away. It's not truth. So if you work in a delusion, if you are working from a place of a lie, it's not true. And over time, you're not able to harmonize that and wake up. What ends up happening is that you just end up being absorbed and connected to the lower planes, because the way out of the lower planes, the eighth sphere, the lower astral plane, whatever language you want to use, is through truth and harmony, and harmony is truth and truth is harmony. And so this is why it is so important to have a prepared mind, right? This is why it's going to be so important to get into all of these different things, because there's all kinds of problems that are going on right now in the archaeological community, in mainstream science. People are looking at the pyramids, and the conclusion is, well, because it could have taken 1,000 years and, millions of people to pull a rock up a ramp, therefore it must be true. We're not even getting into the reality that there could have been advanced technologies, and that the earth itself and matter could be a little bit less solidified, which allowed us to create these certain, we're not even getting into reality. We're protecting these delusions, right? We're not understanding that land masses appear and disappear as well. These conversations are being relegated to the side as though they're stories, right? Every single kind of early humanoid is expected to be traced back to the same one ancestor on the planet. And this is supposed to reveal some big secret about humanity. Well, what if they don't? What if there is a completely different era of peopling the earth, which has nothing to do with everything coming from one common ancestor? What if there's a more complex, sophisticated cosmic process that goes on there? And no, I don't mean aliens coming from other planets and seeding worlds and things like this. This is the other thing that happens, is that suddenly when anything is unusual or out of our paradigm, or usually interdimensional, so it involves stargates or the overlapping of spheres at certain times, it immediately becomes an alien, it immediately becomes an extraterrestrial, and suddenly we're getting into these very bizarre conversations that don't actually acknowledge human evolution and planetary evolution. It becomes all about seeding worlds and space scientists and alien scientists that terraform worlds and seed worlds. And then there's a huge push on our planet for these billionaires to get together and seed worlds like Mars and things like this. This is what happens when the mind is unprepared. When the mind is unprepared and it's trying to enter into a concept that is multidimensional, an aspect of our history that deals with interdimensionality, stargates, beings from other spheres, but there isn't an understanding of exactly what that is. So it becomes aliens. It becomes a totally externalized, materialized version, literalized version, and it loses its sophistication, it loses its elegance, and it becomes untrue. And over time, it becomes a divergent timeline or a divergent impulse that just becomes like a cancer in the community, and it becomes this dominant idea that threatens to destroy our real human past, which is much more sophisticated, and how our planet evolves in increments, not through seeding at all, but through the development of the kingdoms of life, the mineral kingdom, the human kingdom, the animal kingdom, the planet kingdom, over periods of time that are so long. And it's so natural, it's even hard to comprehend, right? So in other words, we're in a time where society is wanting to understand and begin to grasp these ideas that are spiritual, they're esoteric. There's no way around it. And the mind is not prepared. The public's mind is not prepared. And many individuals who are entering into this conversation, I'm sorry, they're entering into it from a materialist perspective, and it's distorting the concepts. And this can lead to a very dangerous collective delusion, okay? But perhaps that is part of it. Perhaps we have to come into things from this extremely materialist perspective, this extremely dogmatic perspective. And then we slowly open up, we slowly remember, we slowly wake up. And that's sort of the process of regaining our spiritual awareness. So I don't bring up the unprepared mind from a place of arrogance or a place of, wanting to put people down. I bring it up because I believe that it is a phase of evolution, of consciousness evolution that is valid, and that we are going through it as a society. But at the same time, we have to recognize that in order to go into these topics, we do have to begin to prepare our mind a little bit more, and actually spiritualize our life more. We have to have a deeper spiritual understanding. We have to understand what spiritual science is or mystery science is, if we want to deal with concepts that are fundamentally esoteric or interdimensional. You cannot go into an interdimensional topic with a materialist perspective. It's absolutely impossible. You've got to meet that where it is, Okay. So there's two different levels that are going to help every single person develop a mind, and not just a mind, but a heart and an essence within them that will allow them to enter into spiritual topics, and will allow them to be changed by them. It'll allow you to enter into streams and actually understand them. And it's really divided into a positive and negative, or kind of a masculine and feminine approach. So the masculine approach is about structure. It's about learning things academically. It's about wisdom, right? And the second aspect, the feminine aspect, or the negative, or the via negative aspect, is all about the development of intuition and creativity and personal development and all of this sort of more wild psychic stuff that really does depend on the masculine side of things, the discipline, study, all of that, to really become what it truly can be. And so, in other words, you need these two polarities of spiritual development: the disciplined study of spiritual science, which is more exoteric. It's a little bit more masculine in nature. It deals with your divine masculine side, your masculine aspect. And also in the masculine mystery schools, that is where all the wisdom is retained exoterically. So that's where you get all of the scrolls, all of the hidden records that are actually physical. It's in the feminine side of the mysteries that is the storytelling. It's not so much about the written history. It is within the feminine consciousness, or within Sophia, which is wisdom, right? It is within the feminine being, the waters of the feminine, the woman, that is the memory, So the feminine side is sort of working with memory, activating memory. It's very internal. And then the masculine side of the mysteries is more exoteric, and it deals more with having a lineage of actual wisdom so that humanity doesn't forget. So it's the keeping of records externally, and the feminine sort of keeps these records internally within herself as memory or memory. Okay, so that is the two polarities within you that you must develop to a satisfactory degree in order to have a prepared mind to authentically enter into our ancient past, our future, the understanding of human development, beings from other spheres, all of that. That has to be developed. These two aspects within you have to be developed to a decent degree if you want to understand esoteric topics. Okay? So On the masculine side, again, you have to condition yourself academically. This is something that a lot of people either really like or really don't like. Sometimes you'll see people and they love studying and they love reading occult books, and they just gather up all this knowledge and they gather it and they gather it, and they know every single occult writer, but they don't have a personal relationship with the information, and the information has not yet gone into that feminine aspect. It hasn't sunken in there. They can't necessarily use it artistically. It's not second nature. It's not alive. It's not animated. The feminine animates these topics, makes it yours, makes it personal, and becomes creative around them. And then there are people who are way too far in this feminine essence. It's almost Luciferian, or it can be. It absolutely is Luciferian, where they absolutely hate any sort of disciplined study of anything. They don't want to study spiritual science. For them, it is a way of feeling caged. For them, their impulse is that they want to be free. And so they'll enter into spiritual topics from a place of wanting to research, wanting to tap into higher planes, just for information that they want, that's going to satisfy themselves. And it's really sort of like a decadent way of approaching spirituality. It's often leads to fantasy, escapism, and it's sort of like using the spiritual world to validate oneself, or to be whatever they want it to be, rather than objectively understanding the laws and what it is. And almost an arrogance in thinking that they can just channel it all themselves. They don't need to read books. They don't need to study spiritual science. They don't need to study mystery science. It doesn't exist. You can just download it all. And so these are the two sort of opposite polarities that exist usually within spiritual study. Is there's people who absolutely love spiritual study, but can almost become dogmatic around it and don't have any personal relationship with the material. And then there's people who absolutely feel confined by it, will reject it, and want to make their spiritual life whatever they want it to be, whatever they feel it to be. And sort of both of those are imbalanced approaches. And the student will need to come into harmony a little bit more if they want to be able to perceive properly, and I think just express themselves properly. So when it comes to spiritual science, this is an anthroposophical term, but it exists long before anthroposophy. And, you know, the concept of spiritual science also exists in theosophy and in Western mystery traditions. It's also called mystery science or occult science. And it also exists in the Eastern tradition. And it's just the reality that no matter what religion or what tradition you're looking at, the underpinning of all traditions is one thread of what is called spiritual science, which means that the religious aspect or the system is just an expression more of the time or of human consciousness at that time and what it means or how it's interpreting spiritual science, which is a basic truth. So, in other words, every single religion, every single mystery tradition is based upon the same spiritual science. And sometimes different aspects are highlighted, or things can be a little bit different because of where humanity is in their own consciousness at that time. Every system is serving humanity at a certain level of consciousness. And as humanity evolves, right, the systems shift and evolve. That's where you get the Eastern tradition for a very long period of time. The Eastern tradition reigns for, 7,000 years, right? And then you get the Western tradition kicking in, which is significantly more objective. The Eastern system tends to be a little bit more subjective, okay? And you get these oscillations in different movements as humanity evolves. But underneath every system is the same occult science. And this includes understanding cosmogenesis, so the creation of our solar system. What is a planetary sphere? What is a fixed star? How did humanity begin in this physical plane? What are planes? What is a spiritual plane? How many are there in our universe? The law of cycles, all of these universal laws, the phases of consciousness, the epochs, the kingdoms of life. Also, the science of human initiation or human spiritual development, the spiritual hierarchies, and the masters, right? Ultimately, why we are here as human beings is to transcend matter, right? Once we materialize, we're here to overcome matter. When a human being overcomes matter, you are considered a master. And there are different positions to mastery that you can achieve in every life after life, that are called spiritual initiation. And there's language around it, like adept, neophyte, things like this that delineate where an individual is in their level of spiritual mastery. Now, this is the system that has always been used in different mystery traditions. It is nearly gone now. There are no public mystery schools like there were in Egypt and Greece, in the Mayan Empire, and in, Atlantis, right? So we're almost flying blind on memory at this point. But just because we don't have any remnants of these mystery schools alive, it doesn't mean that the structure isn't useful, important, and absolutely necessary. Our challenge is that we have had these sort of schools around since Atlantis onward. And now the individual is supposed to remember and do this themselves, right? That's one of the reasons why that sort of group initiation doesn't exist in the same way anymore, is that we've actually been through many different lives in a system just like that. And now it's time for the individual to do this from within. But we can't do it from within unless we acknowledge and understand all of the spiritual science and esoteric tradition and all of the valuable insight and information in our past, right? So when I say esoteric science, I'm also not talking about materialistic science. I'm not talking about dogmatic science. I'm talking about a kind of understanding that includes the material plane and all of the laws and everything that goes with that. And it also includes the spiritual planes in one complete system, objectively. And with anthroposophy especially, it also includes the human being and their role and development and evolution in the cosmos. Okay, so that's what spiritual science is. Now, one of the reasons why, obviously, we need to have a scholarly understanding of the spiritual worlds is that no one person, no one individual can sit here and channel every single universal truth and every single expression over time. No one person can channel a cosmology themselves. No one individual can channel occult science themselves. Occult science is passed down generation after generation after generation in the mystery schools or mystery traditions, and it's vouchsafed and it's up taught and it's upgraded over time. It's something that belongs to the collective, and that many teachers will get to a level where they'll teach it, they'll share it in every generation, and so it's kind of kept alive in the collective, and it belongs to everyone. And it's not possible for one individual to completely access that, teach that, know that, because every individual has blind spots, right? Every single individual has areas where they are crystal clear, but also areas where they can't see. And if you have even one blind spot in your life, you can't channel the cosmos in its entirety. And so this is why we have to have that scholarly approach to understanding higher worlds, is because it's not possible for one individual to channel it all themselves. That's not possible. And I think also, because esotericism is so mysterious, and even when you do have a strong grasp of mystery science, there's always a part of it that eludes you. There's always a part of it that challenges you. You're always refining your understanding. At any one time, you can only see a part of it. And you're always sort of upgrading what you know and releasing something that no longer serves you. But you never necessarily get it 100%. There's always a part of you that is, I guess you could say, evolving in your wisdom. And you don't have to understand everything 100%. It's a process of building and building and building and releasing what seems less truthful and what seems less resonant over time, until you have something that sticks and that works. And that is our process. And I think that because there is that mysterious edge, there's that mysterious element where strange phenomenon can happen, miraculous things can happen, that it's sort of like it gives, I think, in some people's minds, permission for it to never be taken seriously. Because it is anomalous, because it is strange, I think that makes people want to approach it differently than they would any other topic. But ultimately, just like any other thing that you want to understand, whether it be physics and mathematics, whether it be psychology, whether it be cooking, whether it be swimming, gardening, whatever it is, you have to study it. You have to study physics to understand it. You just can't go in and think that it's all going to come to you. You have to learn. You have to have an academic approach. And that is the same thing with mysticism. It is the same thing with spirituality. You have to go in and study it like you would any other topic. You have to have that disciplined structure. Otherwise, when you do become creative with it, it's not going to make sense, all right, over time. Also, another important thing about studying great teachers and some of the great lineages is that there's an initiating quality that the teachers have left behind. And there have been many great teachers on the planet, masters, but also just really great adepts who have kind of left information for us. And it sort of just sits there like a beautiful palace. That's the thing with spiritual teaching as well, is the whole thrust of that is you give your whole life to it and you try to leave humanity with every prize and jewel that you've been able to uncover, with hopes that it will lead to further enlightenment of society. And so there's been many different phenomenal spiritual teachers and also spiritual masters that have left these beautiful teachings for us. These exist in the Eastern traditions and also in the Western traditions. And so it's also a great shame in our lives if we just sort of sit there and let that heritage that we've inherited die on the vine. It's like it is like an empty palace in a lot of ways. And so the good thing is that when we do begin to tune into that knowledge, the knowledge that's been left for us, is that we actually begin to become initiated by that energy. And so, how spiritual initiation works is that you actually have to be in the vicinity of somebody who is of a higher level of consciousness than you, right? Whether it be through reading their writing and tuning into them, or actually studying under them. It is the reality that our heart fields come together. We are all interconnected. We are all one when it comes to our highest energetic centers. And so there is and always has been a great power in initiation on a very energetic level, where just by being in certain people's vicinity, by reading what they wrote, by being in their energy, it causes initiation in your system. You can't expect to be initiated alone entirely. It may be possible, but it would be extremely difficult. There'd be very little context, and so how we do get a prepared mind, how we do prepare ourselves to enter into advanced topics, and just really actually any spiritual topics, is we learn from the greats. We learn from amazing spiritual teachers that have left behind this incredible legacy for us. And when we stand in their glow, we absorb a part of them. And that works upon us, and that awakens us. It's why in the mysteries, they're always called light bearers or flame bearers, because they bring the light and they set you ablaze. And it's one of the beautiful ways that human beings evolve and grow and heal, is through each other. We're not meant to be alone. We're not meant to be on an island figuring everything out ourselves and struggling. We're meant to enrich each other. And part of that is absolutely diving into teachings from great individuals who have left their teachings here for us. Now, every person, has to find the teachings that work for them. They have to find the system that works for them. Like I've said, there is usually divided into two. There's Eastern mysticism and esoterica, and there's also Western. My obvious preference is Western, and I prefer anthroposophy. But there's other systems that exist as well, and every student has to go through their own discovery process to see what system works best for you, how you want to study, what teachers you want to enrich yourself in. And usually it will change throughout your life, and usually you'll read many different kinds of systems, but the whole point is that you are learning, you are studying, and you are learning the objective truth about the spiritual planes. You're learning spiritual law. You are learning about your energy body, and you're learning the actual science of spirit, right? It's not whatever you want it to be. It's not like what one deity you contacted tells you it is. You're actually learning spiritual science. That means that you're actually going to be prepared for life, right? So why this is also very important is that if we don't commit to studying a system, we will probably be drawn again to enter into spiritual study and discussion and community based on our lower urges. So there's a difference between entering into spiritual discussion from a higher place and from a lower place. Okay. So some of the lower urges that can really fuel our desire for spiritual understanding, or just entering into what we think is spiritual understanding, is escapism. A lot of times we enter into the spiritual community because we're in incredible pain and we're tired and we're exhausted, and the spirit is really the only thing left, and we can feel that. And that's actually a good thing. It's okay to enter into spirituality because you're in incredible pain and because you've been whittled down to understand that that glow of spirit in your heart is the only thing left. When you've been beaten down that low, sometimes it's the only thing left. And that's actually completely normal. It's the most common way people come into spirituality today. But if you enter into spirituality from a place of extreme pain, then you have to understand that you have to watch that spirituality for you does not become about escapism and escaping pain, and that you go into certain spiritual topics just to make yourself feel better. That is a misuse of spirituality. You're not objectively learning anything. You're just literally using spiritual concepts to bolster yourself, to make yourself feel better. And that will force you to live. Eventually, you're going to be deluded. You're going to live in delusion because you're using spirituality for the exact opposite reason in which it exists. Spirituality should be used to take as much responsibility in your life as possible and provide as much light on your shadow, and it should be an absolute transformative and often difficult process. So if you're using spirituality to escape and create fantasies, then you're actually misusing it, and you're going to attract very dark things into your life over time that are come into your life to essentially get you to stop doing that. The other way that we can enter into spiritual conversation is through an intense feeling of insecurity. And we can come into spiritual conversation because we want to feel secure. And this usually happens when we are, obsessing over predictions. We need to know what happens in the future. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but there's a whole spiritual channels on YouTube and stuff that don't teach any esoterica at all. They teach no system. They're just giving, predictions or energy updates or telling people what's going to happen in the future. Well, this, if that's all that's going on and that's all you're seeking, then that can be coming from a wound within you that is just looking for security. And you're entering into spirituality, and the main thing that you're wanting from it is just to make you feel secure. Well, that's never going to work. You actually have to develop a deeper connection with God, and you have to develop a sense of security within yourself, especially within those lower centers. And also this lack of security, lack of trust is also very common in like the law of attraction movements and things like that, where spiritual concepts are just basically being used to try to help an individual get what they want in the world and therefore feel in control. And so, like anything, when you are having a spiritual experience, sometimes you're going to see a prediction. Sometimes you're going to see something that happens in the future. Predictions happen naturally. You might look into predictions as part of your work. You might give predictions to your clients because it's part of a reading. But what I'm talking about is the absolute panicked need for a psychic or for a spiritual person to tell you what's going to happen in the future because you have such a sense of insecurity within you. and you have so much terror in you about what's going to happen in the future that you just need somebody to tell you. And so we have to be very careful that we're not entering into concepts based on security and control issues. Does this make sense? And this also is how we get drawn into sensational information as well. So when information is clickbaity and it's designed to bring forward your survivalism and your fears, and this person has the solution to them. This is also a very low form of spiritual discussion that is really only engaging with your absolute lowest centers. It's out of fear. These sensational topics that you absolutely have to know. You click on this. This is happening. This is using the spiritual moniker for really low stuff. Spiritual discussion and spirituality is supposed to be up here. It's supposed to be the structure in our life that we actually are absolutely challenged by, we're inspired by, and it's completely risen up out of the lower centers and is something that we are reverent over. We're not using it and abusing our spirituality to feel better about ourselves, to escape, things like that, because that actually damages our overall sense of what spirit is, about what our own soul is, because we're misusing it. And we often don't know that we're doing that because that's just how this world works. And it is absolutely accepted and encouraged to function on a narcissistic level, to function on a level where every single lower urge is followed, and it's good, it's freeing, and so even though society is going that way, it's not a healthy direction spiritually. And we have to talk about that, because if you're using spirituality in that way, you're not preparing yourself. Your mind is not prepared. You're not initiating yourself into higher stages of consciousness. It's a delusion. It's calling something spiritual and just using spiritual terminology, using spiritual concepts, and there's nothing initiating in it. It's not actually, there's nothing potent in it. Got to be able to discern between initiate actual interaction with spiritual concepts and learning that is initiating for you, and interacting with these ideas in a way that it's absolutely degenerating for you. Okay? It's very important to know, where does your desire for spiritual information come from? We have to be really honest with ourselves. And there have been times in my life where I have entered into spirituality from a very low place, and I just wanted to feel secure, and I misused it in that way. But I didn't understand at the time that I was, right? And it's important to know that even though I'm sitting here talking about entering into these topics from a pure place, in the right place, that even I myself, sitting here talking to you, have made these mistakes. And that's what inspires me and allows me to talk about this with you, is that it is part of our process. And through this, I hope that we can all begin to see what this higher quality initiation is, how the mind really becomes prepared through the absolute study and understanding of spiritual laws, of spiritual science, right? Providing that structure for yourself. And then where spirituality and spiritual discussion can actually be used for very low reasons, but people think it's spiritual because it's just spiritual language, basically. We got to discern these two things, because today, Because today I've noticed it's gotten so crazy and intense, and there's absolutely incentives now to talk about spiritual concepts with basically no knowledge. And you're incentivized by getting likes, by getting views, by getting money, by becoming famous. And so there's a huge incentive to basically just share spiritual information. And it may or may not be good information, but the reason why it's being shared is for greed or personal desire. And that's a very dangerous kind of stream to enter into, because again, it's not going to initiate you. All right. So we want to elevate our development and our study beyond basic personal gratification. So we're not using spiritual topics, spiritual ideas, spiritual processes for basic personal gratification. But we're using it so it can truly shape us beyond what we think we need and enter into a higher rhythm of what we really truly need. So oftentimes what we think we need, right, is relief, or, we think we need something, but it's actually not at all what's going to heal us or inspire us. And so it's going into that higher rhythm of spiritual understanding by studying the topic, objectively understanding what it is, and allowing that to work upon us. Because truth has a way of working upon you and waking you up. Objective truth, objective universal truths, true spiritual truths are like a technology. They have a way of entering your consciousness and working upon you and preparing you and awakening you, right? Whereas when we enter into spiritual topics from a place of lower urges, that will also work to destroy us. It'll do the opposite for us. And so one will prepare your mind, the higher interaction with these concepts, studying spiritual and occult science, getting that objective truth within you, that works upon you, that prepares your mind. You're entering into a stream that begins to work upon you, right? But then when you're outside of genuine study, you can go into deterioration. And then sometimes when that happens, and we'll get into this in the next lecture, people will misuse spirituality, and then they'll blame religion. They'll blame spirituality and be like, this is crap. And they'll completely reject it because they didn't understand something, or they misused it, felt burned by it because they're probably approaching it from, again, this lower place, lower urges. Their first foray into spirituality was dark for them, probably because they were not approaching it correctly. And then because of that, they paint every spiritual topic with the same brush, when really it was that individual entering into the topic improperly, not preparing themselves, going deeper and deeper and deeper into it, and then getting burned. And then as a protection mechanism, they begin to reject all spirituality. They'll go into like dogmatic religion or dogmatic science as like a safety, because they didn't enter into it properly. Okay. So that's the masculine side. That is the actual study of occult science, the laws of the universe, the epochs of the earth, cosmogenesis, how a planet develops, how a star develops, how human beings evolve, the spiritual hierarchies. Those objective truths prepare your mind, and there are many of them. It is something you study life after life after life. These objective cosmic spiritual truths shape you and condition you, because every single cosmic truth is an inner process that you have to master. So you have to hear the objective cosmic spiritual science of spirituality in order to personally evolve, because it's the same thing. So you need that initiating science. Now, let's get into the more feminine aspect of preparing your mind, the via negativa, the inner process, the inner work that allows you to become creative with the structure, with the masculine side of things. It allows you to go extremely deep into unusual information. The more your divine masculine is properly developed, the deeper you can go into esoteric truths, because you have a really strong structural understanding of the spiritual planes, of the cosmos, of development, and all those patterns are so interwoven in your being that you can just let go. You know the language, you know the discipline, you know the science. So that allows you to go even deeper to your soul, to your creativity, to past lives. It allows you to become absolutely an incredible mystic, because you have that confidence to let go, because you have that system developed that you've learned. You know the universal truths. It's like that Picasso quote, learn the laws so you can break them like a pro. Now, I wouldn't say break any laws or anything like that, but you get the concept. You get the concept. There is no real creativity. There is no real depth unless the structure is known. And so now we're getting into that feminine side that's a bit more chaotic. And this feminine side works to prepare our mind by healing and by inner reflection and by memories coming forward. So this is all the personal stuff. The masculine side is the exoteric knowledge. It is the study and understanding, the science. It is spiritual science, right? Now we're getting into the human side of things, which lies more in the inner work, which is a more feminine aspect. And so, for example, usually in most mystery traditions, there's just this reality that you're not going to get to the higher levels of understanding or the higher levels of initiation unless you develop certain character traits, right? Unless your personality actually evolves to a certain point to be humble, to be self-aware. And so there's all of these different inner developments that have to occur for you to actually be able to access higher wisdom. If these personality traits do not develop, then you will not be able to pass the threshold into the higher planes. You will remain in the lower planes. You'll remain in the lower astral plane. And so spiritual development is connected to character. And it's also connected to purity, the purity of the heart. There is no way around this. Many people have tried to only go into the wisdom side of things and obsess over spiritual wisdom and never do the personal development side. And that usually leads to absolute degeneration of the body, degeneration of the mind, because ultimately, when we rise out of this plane as a master one day, hopefully, we do so with our entire being intact, right? You don't get to do it half-heartedly. You have to develop as well. You have to personally develop. And so this is sort of that feminine, more inward side of things. And it's really rooted in having a strong honest spiritual practice and a strong, honest relationship with yourself where you're facing your shadow and you are taking responsibility for absolutely everything in your life. That is what prepares you to enter into advanced spiritual concepts, especially things that may be unknown. Without that, there is no, without personal development, there is no exalted knowledge. So one of the key things to prepare your mind to enter into the ancient past, like Atlantis, to understand beings from other spheres, all of that stuff, is you actually have to have a regular meditation practice, okay? Meditation clears the mind and it prevents the negative ego from creeping in and taking over and tainting your perspective. So having a regular meditation, at least in the morning and at least in the evening, is going to bring you clarity of mind, and it's going to make you aware of when your negative ego is creeping in, and it's going to allow you to delineate and understand what part of you is your pure consciousness, your I, and what part of you is basically these negative ego patterns that creep in and try to hijack your personality, essentially causing misery. Okay? So you have to have a regular meditation practice to be able to do that. You've got to pull the weeds, and that prepares you by creating a clear mind. Because whenever we become confused, whenever we become unable to discern a truth, like if there's a spiritual entity and we can't discern whether it's a good entity or a bad entity, that is because deep down we have not discerned an aspect of ourselves, whether it's our negative ego or our pure self. So the more that we cultivate that pure self, that development of the I, and we spiritualize ourselves, the more obvious good and evil becomes in the world, because we've picked the weeds in our garden and we've seen ourselves. We can't do that unless we have a really strong meditation practice, especially observational meditation, which means you're observing your thoughts, right? It's a very passive observational practice, really helps us to observe everything that's going on. The second thing that we need is yoga. Now, I'm not talking about, going to your hot yoga studio and like working out, although you can do that if you want. I'm talking about yoga in the most traditional sense of the word, which is the union of your mind and your spirit with your body. So just because you're meditating doesn't mean that you're in union with your body. You want to do actions that are uniting your mind and your body. And you want to make sure that you're connecting with your body throughout the day. This is going to prevent nervousness. It's going to prevent anxiety. And it's going to allow you to be very aware of what you're not processing and the emotions that are getting trapped and clogged in the body. The body is the storehouse for all of our undigested energy, all of our unhealed wounds. And so it's very easy to get our mind spinning so fast that we do not feel, or we cannot feel, certain problems that are occurring in the body. And every problem in the body is first a problem in the mind and in the consciousness. And so what you want to do is you want to have a practice where you feel into your body somatically. And you want to talk to your body, and you want to understand that your body and your physicality is just as important and just as spiritual as your most fine, etheric, beautiful, glowing body that you can't even see. Every body that you have is spiritual, including your physical body. And it also keeps us grounded, especially for those folks who are extremely dreamy and spiritual coming into the body, feeling the body, brings you into the right harmony, the right rhythm for this time. And it also makes you more grounded. When we become ungrounded, usually it's because our energy is pulled up out of our lower centers, and we are kind of beginning to enter the kind of mania of hiding out in our mind and our upper centers. So you really want to be able to fully be seated in the heart, which is the center of your being, and feeling your body. And then the intuitive information or spiritual information, will always just drop in. It'll just plop in if you need it. There's no need to just be out here all the time. So it's very important to have a connection with your body. Also, if you are working intuitive, it's very common for the body to seize up. And so you're going to want to watch that too, or the body to, be going through these different things because of the spiritual energy that's coming in. So keep that in mind as well. You're going to also want to have periods of inward reflection. Every day, you're going to want to take the temperature of what you're feeling. If you have an emotional outburst, if you're going into a dark period, you have to have personal honesty and self-responsibility to figure out exactly why you're there. You have to understand why and be dedicated to feeling and understanding why you're cycling in certain emotions and taking responsibility for those emotions, taking responsibility for your life. And this means that you are actively and humbly looking within regularly, and you're seeking to heal. So there is no spiritual advancement without healing. And we spiritually advance to the exact degree that we heal. They're inseparable, right? And spiritual advancement means also opening new pages of knowledge, right? So you can't get spiritual knowledge and spiritual understanding or occult knowledge or interdimensional knowledge unless you are healed to a certain degree. That's because occult knowledge often has a certain frequency to it. And if it's very advanced, it can actually harm you, can harm your body. And so a lot of this is really just preparing your mind and your body through self-care and healing to actually be able to maintain these higher streams of spiritual energy, which are incredibly fast moving and incredibly intense. And so you have to be at a certain inner level of development that doesn't hurt you, and just the most practical sense of spiritual development. Okay. You also have to honor your intuition by listening and writing down impressions. So when we enter into spiritual development, it's not just about taking in other people's information and just studying the greats and all of that. It's actually about you forming your own understanding of these things. It's you actually taking them on and applying them to your life, to your experiences, your past life experiences. It's you animating the structure that you study and that you know, and making it yours, and it becoming a functional, animated, an operative system within you, right? Because truth is a technology. When you learn an objective spiritual truth in mystery science, that works as a technology within you. And on the deepest level, you begin to remember who you are. Because the biggest secret about spiritual development and knowledge is that it's actually all within you. But in order for us to access it within, we have to satisfy a certain level of exoteric understanding. So in order for us to truly go inward, we have to do that study first. We have to give that context and that structure to ourselves. And then that begins to help us animate our inner world. And so you want to listen to your intuition. You want to write down your impressions. You want to become creative with the information that you know. You want to become playful with it. You want to become creative with it because you want it to become yours. All right. So once you understand spiritual law and occult science, you can animate the structure with your memories and insights, which allows an even deeper level of knowledge. So celebrate your spiritual insights through personal creativity. So creating something from your spiritual work. So when you remember a past life, or when you feel like you've downloaded an important piece of spiritual wisdom, create something, write it down, create art from it, do something in honor of the reality that you just came full circle in something. Because there's a special power that happens when the individual begins to remember, right? And so you want to honor that. You want to write them down. You want to encourage this deeper part of you to come forward. Don't just tell yourself like, oh, I can't have a good spiritual insight, or my opinion isn't as valuable as, this teacher or this person. Don't sell yourself short whenever you come to what you feel like is a breakthrough. Celebrate that breakthrough by doing something creative around it. Write it down, journal it, create art around it, and talk about it, because that's a really big deal. And I promise you that if something is a breakthrough for you, it's absolutely going to also be a breakthrough for someone else, because what you feel and what is amazing to you or what you value is probably a shared experience as well. And that's how we all rise. That's how we all come up. And so when you do start getting your spiritual insights, when you do start to integrate everything that you're studying and you see it all coming together, celebrate that, because that is something to be proud of, because you're entering into a sense of originality. Do you know what I'm saying? I hope this makes sense. And also, the more service-oriented you are in your discoveries and in your work, the more prepared you become for deeper initiation and knowledge. So one of the main things about spiritual development is that you can only really get to a certain point, especially if you're wanting to work in the field or it's a very serious pursuit for you. You're going to be called at a certain point to be in service to humanity with the level of development that you are achieving. And your development will absolutely stop, and it will distort if you cannot devote yourself to service and you can't enter into a selfless state with what you're doing. It's the ultimate test. And it's the ultimate way that you get to that next level within yourself, right? So there's always a point in every person's spiritual journey where you have to make a decision whether you're going to just pursue spiritual truths like for your own interest, and that's fine. But once you get to a certain point of saturation, you have to serve humanity. And there are certain truths and there's certain energies that will not be available to you. There's certain levels of preparation that you will not receive unless you dedicate your life to service. And so if somebody is wanting to teach from a greedy place, from a place of wanting fame or money, and it doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean that you can't work as an intuitive. It doesn't mean that you can't teach. It means that the reason why you are doing what you are doing is for pretty much exclusively lower urges, right? There's a difference between motive. And so if that is coming from a lower place, then your development will absolutely stop. Your mind will not be prepared at all to enter into certain topics, and you will deteriorate. And the highest levels of knowledge that I would argue are actually teaching levels, and energies, will only come through service. And it's very important that every student knows that, hey, this is not a field that you come into to, from a lower place to completely and totally only focus on enriching yourself or whatever that is. It's dangerous. It's actually dangerous to do that. So the last part of this, in the cultivating of the holy personality, the divine personality, is service. That has to be the main reason why you do what you do. There has to be a love for humanity and service. And that is actually what gets the individual into an exalted position. It's not knowledge first. Someone becomes super hyper knowledgeable and then they reach a position. It's actually the other way around. There has to be certain character traits and personality developed in the individual. And then the knowledge comes. And then the power to influence comes, right? So so basically it's sort of like, once the negative ego is sort of shooed away and dissolved away, it leaves behind a holy personality, a divine personality. And that divine or holy personality is recognized by certain character traits. One of the character traits is humbleness. So there is a joy in actually seeing other people rise. And this is the idea of the reluctant leader. So there's a humbleness and a desire to see people rise because there is a level of fulfillment inside that person that is already fulfilled. They're not looking to experience love and acknowledgement through the crowd anymore. It is, they've reached a state of development personally where that now comes from their relationship with God. And so the external world and external life completely changes for that person in their mind. And again, this is the prepared mind. And in that way, you sort of get off this desire for the external world to fulfill you. And you're working on a completely different level of inner fulfillment, and your external life takes on a completely different quality. All right. And that's a very important step in any spiritual student and in the preparation of consciousness to receive spiritual forces, because you can't be addicted to things. You can't have these burning desires, things like that, because they will prevent you from having certain knowledge. So humbleness has always been a quality of someone who has a prepared personality, a prepared mind, not from a place of putting yourself down Not from like a weird place where you're being like self-deprecating. Humbleness and spirituality actually comes from complete and utter satisfaction in one's relationship with the divine. And there is something developed there in that individual where they're no longer looking to the material world to satisfy them, because they know that it never will. And that the only thing that will ever satisfy you is your relationship with God and Christ in your heart. And that everything else is just sort of a representation of that for you. And you start to function on a completely different level. And that is also sort of the dissolution of, again, the negative ego. That has always been a trait of somebody with a prepared mind. There's also a true reverence for God. You can sense with individuals that are functioning on that level that there is a very deep reverence and connection with God within them. There is that sense of awe. There is a relationship there with the divine that has been cultivated, and it is providing a kind of inspiration every single day. They're not looking for inspiration in the external world. They're not looking for something to happen outside of them to make themselves feel good, because there is this developed reverence for God through dedication, through discipline, and through experience that was developed and over time cultivated, which makes somebody incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. It seals off your whole energy body and makes it incredibly high functioning. Also, another characteristic of a prepared mind is having a childlike nature or a childlike mind. The idea is, and this is actually a very Buddhist concept, of course, is that the individual begins as an unhealed, immature child, and then comes full circle into the wise child. So there's a difference between naivety and genuine innocence. And genuine innocence, which is also shown in esoteric Christianity as virginity, is really about a purity of consciousness, so that the mind is like a child again. So you see the world and it is beautiful to you. You're interested in basic things. You see God and everything around you, not in some mania way or some ecstatic, overstimulated way, but in a very deep knowing. It's a very deep, smooth understanding. It's not mania, right? And so the return to the childlike mind allows for a very deep relationship with God, because the difference between the child and the adult is that the adult is often working through these different paradigms that are to protect them. So the adult is often the summation of all of this pain and all of this wounding, and we don't interact with people how they truly are, how we truly are, or it's always working through these projections that we create to protect ourselves. And so in that way, we're never truly knowing anyone, and we're never really knowing ourselves, because we're always operating in this survivalism. Well, the overcoming of this survivalism and living in these projections is the divine child within, and that is the dissolution of those qualities and the ability to truly just look upon another human being with a feeling of love and a genuine interest, and and even maybe a desire to see them grow, to want the best for them. This can only happen when an individual has reached that point of spiritual security within themselves, right? And when this happens, the mind returns to almost like a childlike nature. It returns to that state of innocence, right? And this is also why, like, even I think about like the Sunat Kumara legends, which we've been talking about with the Venus work and all these different people, their ability to laugh, their ability to not take yourself too seriously. These kinds of things are actually a sign of somebody who is initiated. They have a prepared mind. Also, there should be a dedicated a part of you that, again, is also in that masculine side of things. You should be dedicated to spiritual study. You should have a part of you that is understanding clearly spiritual law, and again, cosmogenesis, what a planet is, what a fixed star is. There's this massive topic that is spiritual science, human initiation. This also has to be a part of you, and that's what allows you to relax. The more we study, the more we relieve ourselves of anxiety, actually, because our mind can actually understand. And oftentimes when our logical mind is not satisfied, when our mind does not understand something, it cannot relax, it cannot depotentiate, it will not let go, right? And so that's also the beautiful part of mystery science and studying it is that it allows you to relax, because there's a part of you that now knows that you understand spiritual law, that if you encounter something or whatever, there's going to be some structure for you to weigh your encounters against. There's going to be some structure for you to actually understand. All the pressure isn't on you to divine the answer, which, intuition abilities often like the wind. There's good days and there's bad days. So give yourself that incredible support by studying these topics objectively, by learning the wisdom, and also being dedicated to your own healing and self-examination. So that is the best way to prepare yourself to enter into spiritual topics. You've got the masculine on one side, the learning, and then you've got kind of the more feminine side of self-development and inner stuff. And that is actually going to allow you to function multidimensionally. It's going to allow you to understand the world around you, and enter into spiritual paradigms, right? It's creating the right energy in your body, and it is creating the right structure in your mind to enter into concepts that go beyond materiality. Okay? So thank you everyone so much for joining me. In our next lecture, we will go even deeper into what happens when these characteristics are not taken on, when the mind is not prepared, and how that really changes society and how it can negatively affect the individual. So I will see you guys next week with that lecture. And I'll also be continuing talking about Venus and the beings from Venus as well. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you in our next lecture.